Okay. Just getting the stream link in. So, but just want to see if anybody else comes in the meantime. In the meantime, I will just roll a cigarette. Hopefully, if I do the speak at the March for Australia next Sunday and actually manage to do it right, I won't need to hopefully maybe get more viewers. Maybe. If I do make a speech, I'm hoping to have it recorded to put it up on the channel, by the way. So subscribe if you want to see that. Okay. What are we going on now? Welcome to the weekly Tuesday reading stream, where I will, of course, as with the last few weeks, continue reading COVID-19, The Great Reset, the manifesto of the World Economic Forum. As I've said before, chapter 1 will take a while. So, still, how far have I got? That much in. So, getting there. I reckon if I'm lucky, maybe it'll end up being like um being like 6 to 10 more streams probably. I don't see it being any more than 10 reading this book. So 2 viewers. Still only 32 subscribers. I wish I had more, but more streams. Keep it up regularly, and we'll get there. So we will see. I should do another sunset rant at some point, or a sunrise rant or something. I did that last time, and what was almost an hour. Yeah, but plenty of videos. Well, not all that many. I mean, I've got only doing the public ones. It's 1, 2, and then whatever shorts are there. The 3-day fast. And then just the live streams. Apart from that, that's all I have. We got some private and unlisted videos there. Let's finish this smoke now. We'll get started. Oh, then I'll have a shower. We'll just change straight into this from me working. I only put on the shirt too. I still got on like just shorts. Um, yeah. See how it goes. I'll be writing up a stream. Writing up a speech for the March for Australia next Sunday. Thankfully, the Nazis, National Socialist Network, they will not be at the marches. So that's good. Also, I should go and link. I'll put my Substack in the description. I just I've released a couple of articles recently. So I'll just put that in. I'm still posting broadly spontaneously at this stage. So let me just see if that comes through. Let's go back into the thing out. Yeah. Link is in there now. I've got a couple of new articles out as of recently. So you can subscribe to that, and you can get them sent to your email when they come out, and that helps that one grow a little bit as well. But with that out of the way, let's continue reading. So we left off at 1.3.4, the social contract. So we were in 1.3 societal reset. This is 1.3.4, the social contract. It is almost inevitable that the pandemic will prompt many societies around the world to reconsider and redefine the terms of their social contract. We have already alluded to the fact that COVID-19 has acted as an amplifier of pre-existing conditions, bringing to the fore long-standing issues that resulted from deep structural frailties that had never been properly addressed. This dissonance and an emergent questioning of the status quo is finding expression in a loudening call to revise the social contracts by which we are all more or less bound. I will have to read social contract theory at some point. I've got some books on it, including Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Social Contract. So, broadly defined, the social contract refers to the often implicit set of arrangements and expectations that govern the relations between individuals and institutions. Put simply, it is the glue that binds societies together. Without it, the social fabric unravels. For decades, it has slowly and almost imperceptibly evolved in a direction that forced individuals to assume greater responsibility for their individual lives and economic outcomes, leading large parts of the population, most evidently in the low-income brackets, to conclude that the social contract was at best being eroded, if not in some cases breaking down entirely. I think he's talking about neoliberalism, the sort of hyper-individualism of neoliberalism, the resurgence of like the Protestant work ethic, things like that. It goes without saying it's bullshit. The Protestant work ethic and the hyper-individualism, it has only damaged society. It has only made society worse. It has torn away previous sort of collectivist and community norms. It has isolated us as individuals. Yeah, not good. The apparent illusion of low or no inflation is a practical and illustrative example of how this erosion plays out in real-life terms. For many years the world over, the rate of inflation has fallen for many goods and services, with the exception of the three things that matter the most to a great majority of us: housing, healthcare, and education. For all three, prices have risen sharply, absorbing an ever larger proportion of disposable incomes and, in some countries, even forcing families to go into debt to receive medical treatment. Similarly, in the pre-pandemic era, work opportunities had expanded in many countries, but the increase in employment rates often coincided with income stagnation and work polarization. This situation ended up eroding the economic and social welfare of a large majority of people whose revenue was no longer sufficient to guarantee a modestly decent lifestyle, including among the middle class in the rich world. Today, the fundamental reasons underpinning the loss of faith in our social contracts coalesce around issues of inequality, the ineffectiveness of most redistribution policies, a sense of exclusion and marginalization, and a general sentiment of unfairness. This is why many citizens have begun to denounce a breakdown of the social contract, expressing more and more forcefully a general loss of trust in institutions and leaders. In some countries, this widespread exasperation has taken the form of peaceful or violent demonstrations. In others, it has led to electoral victories for populist and extremist parties. Whichever form it takes, in almost all cases, the establishment's response has been left wanting. Ill-prepared for the rebellion and out of ideas and policy levers to address the problem. Although they are complex, the policy solutions do exist and broadly consist in adapting the welfare state to today's world by empowering people and by responding to the demands for a fairer social contract. Over the past few years, several international organizations and think tanks have adjusted to this new reality and outlined proposals on how to make it happen. The pandemic will mark a turning point by accelerating this transition. It has crystallized the issue and made a return to the pre-pandemic status quo impossible. What form might the new social contract take? There are no off-the-shelf, ready-to-go models because each potential solution depends upon the history and culture of the country to which it applies. Inevitably and understandably, a good social contract for China will be different from one for the US, which in turn will not resemble that of Sweden or Nigeria. However, they could all share some common features and principles, the absolute necessity of which has been made ever more obvious by the social and economic consequences of the pandemic crisis. Two in particular stand out. One, a broader, if not universal, provision of social assistance, social insurance, healthcare, and basic quality services. Two, a move towards enhanced protection for workers and for those currently most vulnerable, like those employed in and fueling the gig economy, in which full-time employees are replaced by independent contractors and freelancers. It is often said that a nation's response to a disaster speaks volumes about its strengths and dysfunctions, and first and foremost about the quality and robustness of its social contract. As we progressively move away from the most acute moments of the crisis and begin a thorough examination of what went right and what didn't, we should expect a lot of soul-searching that will ultimately lead to a redefinition of the terms of our social contract. In countries that were perceived as providing a subpar response to the pandemic, many citizens will start asking critical questions such as, why is it that in the midst of the pandemic, my country often lacked masks, respirators, and ventilators? Why wasn't it properly prepared? Does it have to do with the obsession with short-termism? Why are we so rich in GDP terms and so ineffective at delivering good health care to all those who need it? How can it be that a person who has spent more than 10 years training to become a medical doctor and whose end-of-year results are measured in lives receives compensation that is meager compared to that of a trader or a hedge fund manager? The COVID-19 crisis has laid bare the inadequate state of most national health systems, both in terms of costs of lives of patients and of nurses and doctors. In rich countries where tax-funded health services have suffered for a long time from a lack of resources, the UK National Health Service being the most extreme example, due to political concerns about rising taxes, calls for more spending and therefore higher taxes, will get louder, with a growing realization that efficient management cannot compensate for underinvestment. COVID-19 has also revealed yawning gaps in most welfare systems. At first glance, the nations that reacted in the most inclusive manner are those with an elaborate welfare system, most notably the Scandinavian countries. To provide an example, as early as March 2020, Norway guaranteed 80% of self-employed workers' average incomes based on the tax returns of the previous 3 years, while Denmark guaranteed 75%. At the other end of the spectrum, the most market-oriented economies played catch-up and showed indecisiveness in how to protect the most vulnerable segments of the labour market, particularly the gig workers, the independent contractors, and on-call and temporary workers whose employment consists of income-earning activities that are outside the traditional employer-employee relationship. An important topic that may have a decisive impact on the new social contract is sick leave. Economists tend to agree that the absence of paid sick leave makes it harder to contain the spread of an epidemic. The simple reason being that if employees are denied access to it, they may be tempted or forced to go to work while they are infected and thus spread the disease. No shit. This is particularly true for low-income and service workers. The two often go hand in hand. When the swine flu pandemic occurred in 2009 to 2010, the American Public Health Association estimated that around 7 million people were infected, and an additional 1,500 died because contagious employees could not afford not to go to work. Among the rich economies, only the US has a system that leaves it at the discretion of employers to decide whether to provide paid sick leave. In 2019, almost a quarter of all US workers, about 40 million, largely concentrated in low-wage positions, did not benefit from it. In March 2020, when the pandemic started to rage in the US, President Trump signed into law new legislation that temporarily required employers to provide 2 weeks of sick leave plus family leave at partial pay, but only for workers with childcare problems. It remains to be seen how this will feature in the redefinition of the social contract in the US. By contrast, almost all European countries require employers to provide paid sick leave for varying periods during which workers are also protected from dismissal. New laws that were promulgated at the beginning of the pandemic also meant that the state would compensate part of or the whole salary of people confined at home, including those working in the gig economy and freelancers. In Japan, all workers are entitled to up to 20 days of paid leave every year, while in China, they are entitled to sick pay that ranges from 60% to 100% of daily wages during any period of illness, with the length of sick leave contractually agreed or defined between workers and employers. As we move forward, we should expect such issues to intrude more and more in the redefinition of our social contract. Another aspect that is critical for social contracts in Western democracies pertains to liberties and freedom. There is currently growing concern that the fight against this pandemic and future ones will lead to the creation of permanent surveillance societies. Uh-huh. What's happening right now? I am surprised how much he's actually right about here. Now, I haven't really seen much. Like, I don't agree with stakeholder capitalism. It's like that's not like it's just capitalism. Like it's still capitalism. I'm an anti-capitalist. I don't care what form it takes. I oppose it. But he seems to be right about so much. Like the amount of times in these streams that I have said like no shit after reading something out of this book is fucking shocking. It's This issue is explored in more detail in the chapter on the technological reset, but suffice to say that a state emergency can only be justified when a threat is public, universal, or existential. In addition, political theorists often emphasize that extraordinary powers require authorization from the people and must be limited in time and proportion. One can agree with the former part of the assertion, public, universal, and existential threat. But what about the latter? Expected to be a prominent component of future discussions about what our social contract should look like. Collectively redefining the terms of our social contracts is an epochal task that binds the substantial challenges of the present moment to the hopes of the future. As Henry Kissinger reminded us, the historic challenge for leaders is to manage the crisis while building the future. Failure could set the world on fire. While reflecting on the contours we think a future social contract might follow, we ignore at our peril the opinion of the younger generation who will be asked to live with it. Their adherence is decisive, and thus to better understand what they want, we must not forget to listen. This is made all the more significant by the fact that the younger generation is likely to be more radical than the older one in refashioning our social contract. Yeah. Yeah. The pandemic has upended their lives, and a whole generation across the globe will be defined by economic and often social insecurity, with millions due to enter the workforce in the midst of a profound recession. They will bear these scars forever. Yep. Also, starting off in a deficit, many students have educational debts, is likely to have long-term effects. Already, the millennials, at least in the Western world, are worse off than their parents in terms of earnings, assets, and wealth. They are less likely to own a home or have children than their parents were. Now, another generation, Gen Z, my generation, is entering a system that it sees as failing and that will be beset by long-standing problems revealed and exacerbated by the pandemic. As a college junior, quoted in the New York Times, put it, young people have a deep desire for radical change because we see the broken path ahead. How will this generation respond? By proposing radical solutions and often radical action in an attempt to prevent the next disaster from striking, whether it's climate change or social inequalities. It will most likely demand a radical alternative to the present course because its members are frustrated and dogged by a nagging belief that the current system is fractured beyond repair. It is. Youth activism is increasing worldwide, being revolutionized by social media that increases mobilization to an extent that would have been impossible before. It takes many different forms, ranging from non-institutionalized political participation through demonstrations and protests, and addresses issues as diverse as climate change, economic reforms, gender equality, and LGBTQ rights. The young generation is firmly at the vanguard of social change. There is little doubt that it will be the catalyst for change and a source of critical momentum for the Great Reset. Okay. Next is 1.4, geopolitical reset, which I will just check how long that is. Bloody hell, this section is long, man. um, I will not get through all of that. Right. Revolutionaries have long understood that the youth are the catalyst for change. That much has been obvious. Um, and I mean, yeah, like at the end of the day, like, I'm one of the people he's talking about there. I'm one of the people he's talking about. The current system is fucking broken. And, yeah, growing extremism is to be expected. Either left wing extremism like myself, or shit like the National Socialist Network, Nazis, fascists, all of that crap. Like, radicalization is increasing because the system is not working. I should specify, though I argue it doesn't work at all, but I should specify at the very minimum, it is not working for my generation. That is a big, that is a big thing. That's why it is for the most part my generation that is taking on increasingly radical beliefs in one or the other direction. So, that's really what it is. And yeah. And talking about like radical policy, radical action, I have some, proposals for radical action. Not so much policies, because I don't believe we live in a democracy anymore. Um, but in terms of like grassroots action. In the sense of, when I mean grassroots action, it's in like this protest harder. No. And, concrete grassroots solutions to problems, not just protesting harder. Protests are good, but they really only serve a purpose of like getting the government to do what you want them to do at a certain point. They the best way to get the government to do what you want is to disrupt the economy somehow. And that can do a lot of damage to the powers that be, the politicians, the bureaucrats, the politicians, the bureaucrats, the billionaires, all of that shit. Really, that is kind of what it there's no better way to damage them and make them act or make them fuck off than crippling the economy somehow. Now, this can be achieved in various ways. The easiest way to do it. Okay, so the easiest way to do it is overly disruptive protests. That's probably the easiest way to do it. Is that the most effective way to do it? No. Probably what's more effective and more difficult is a general strike, where you have all your unions across all industries just walk out of the job and shut down the economy. Shut down the economy for that can do the trick. That definitely tends to do the trick, because the whole thing slows to a fucking crawl for a while. It forces them to act in the moment. Now, the most difficult, but also the most rewarding in terms of not just making them act, or not just shutting down the economy, but permanently weakening it. Like, if you want something, it's difficult, but it's something that could be more long-lasting, prefiguration. Things like mutual, you find grassroots ways to decouple the people from the economy, from the capitalist economy. That is a very difficult thing to do. It's far more difficult than orchestrating a general strike or an overly disruptive protest. And what would be especially good for completely breaking the system would be have all these alternative grassroots options that meet people's needs without engaging in have this decoupling from the system, and then do a general strike. Watch as the entire system shatters in front of you. That's that would be the most effective way, but as I said, very, very, very different. Insanely difficult, especially if you want to do that on the scale of an entire nation, especially one with a high population. You're dealing with a lot of what ifs. You're dealing with a lot of you're dealing with pretty big task if you want to try and decouple the people from the capitalist economy. That's prefigurative approach. That's like the anarchist approach. And yeah, that would be the most effective because you can keep doing it. Like you can keep it going. And it almost becomes like a slow burn as well. You slowly do. And like with the general strike, or with a protest, the government pretty much has three options. They can either concede to the demands, they can also use state violence against protesters. That's an option. Or they can just not do anything. And sometimes protest movements just fizzle out organically. It does happen. And that's yes. Yeah, so they have the option of not doing anything in that instance. With a general strike, the option of them not doing anything is not really an option anymore because the entire economy will crumble if they don't. However, to an extent, depending on how much preparation was put into a general strike, depends sort of how long it can go for. If a general strike cannot last a week without the workers having a sort of the government can probably get away with doing nothing or very little. Or they have the option again of state violence. Now, the third option, where you have a degree of permanence to it, their only option is violence. Like, because even if they meet demands, if you have set up an alternative economic framework outside of the system, you don't need to make demands. Like, you don't need to make demands. You can just go, fuck you. That's, and at that point, their only option is violence. And that's how they start a revolution. So, because especially if the people have the ability to defend themselves. So I mean, not all anarchists are like violent revolutionaries. I mean, Christian anarchists. I mean, I am a Christian anarchist, but I'm not a pacifist. I'm not a pacifist like most of them are. That is a pretty crucial difference. Um, so that's so yeah, like the prefiguration approach, it allows a degree of permanence, and that can cause real problems with the system. All right. Let's start 1.4 geopolitical reset. Just check messages. Only one person watching. Thank you. The connectivity between geopolitics and pandemics flows both ways. On the one hand, the chaotic end of multilateralism, the vacuum of global governance, and the rise of various forms of nationalism make it more difficult to deal with the outbreak. The coronavirus is spreading globally and sparing no one, while simultaneously the geopolitical fault lines that divide societies spur many leaders to focus on national responses, a situation that constrains collective effectiveness and reduces the ability to eradicate the pandemic. On the other hand, the pandemic is clearly exacerbating and accelerating geopolitical trends that were already apparent before the crisis erupted. What were they, and what is the current state of geopolitical affairs? The late economist Jean-Pierre Lerman, who taught at IMD in Lausanne, summed up today's situation with great perspicacity when he said, "There is no new global order, just a chaotic transition to uncertainty." More recently, Kevin Rudd, president of the Asia Society Policy Institute and former Australian Prime Minister, expressed similar sentiments, worrying specifically about the coming post-COVID-19 anarchy. Various forms of rampant nationalism are taking the place of order and cooperation. The chaotic nature of national and global responses to the pandemic thus stands as a warning of what could come on an even broader scale. This has been years in the making with multiple causes that intersect with each other. But the determining element of geopolitical instability is the progressive rebalancing from the west to the east, a transition that creates stresses and that, in the process, also generates global disorder. This is captured in the so-called Thucydides trap, the structural stress that inevitably occurs when a rising power like China rivals a ruling power like the US. This confrontation will be a source of global messiness, disorder, and uncertainty for years to come. I swear, man's a fucking prophet. No, I'm joking. It's just it's yeah, it's just tracing global. It's just tracing trends that were already happening. Irrespective of whether one likes the US or not, its progressive disengagement, the equivalent of a geopolitical taper, as the historian Niall Ferguson put it, from the international scene, is bound to increase international volatility. More and more countries that tended to rely on global public goods provided by the US hegemon for sea lane security, the fight against international terrorism, etc., will now have to tend their own backyards themselves. The 21st century will most likely be an era devoid of an absolute hegemon, during which no one power gains absolute dominance. As a result, power and influence will be redistributed chaotically and in some cases grudgingly. In this messy new world defined by a shift toward multipolarity and intense competition for influence, the conflicts or tensions will no longer be driven by ideology, with the partial and limited exception of radical Islam. But spurred by nationalism and the competition for resources. If no one power can enforce order, our world will suffer from a global order deficit. Unless individual nations and international organizations succeed, in finding solutions to better collaborate at the global level, we risk entering an age of entropy in which retrenchment, fragmentation, anger, and parochialism will increasingly define our global landscape, making it less intelligible and more disorderly. The pandemic crisis has both exposed and exacerbated this sad state of affairs. The magnitude and consequence of the shock it has inflicted are such that no extreme scenario can now be taken off the table. The implosion of some failing states or petrostates, the possible unraveling of the EU, a breakdown between China and the US that leads to war, all these and many more have now become plausible, albeit hopefully unlikely, scenarios. In the following pages, we review four main issues that will become more prevalent in the post-pandemic era and that conflate with each other. The erosion of globalization, the absence of global governance, the increasing rivalry between the US and China, and the fate of fragile and failing states. Globalization and nationalism. Globalization, an all-purpose word, is a broad and vague notion that refers to the global exchange between nations of goods, services, people, capital, and now even data. It has succeeded in lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, but for quite a number of years now, it has been called into question and even started to recede. As highlighted previously, today's world is more interconnected than it has ever been. But for more than a decade, the economic and political impetus that made the case for and supported the increase in globalization has been on the wane. The global trade talks that started in the early 2000s failed to deliver an agreement, while during that same period, the political and societal backlash against globalization relentlessly gained strength. As the social costs provoked by the asymmetric effects of globalization rose, particularly in terms of manufacturing unemployment in high-income countries, the risks of financial globalization became ever more apparent after the great financial crisis that began in 2008. Thus combined, they triggered the rise of populist and right-wing parties around the world, most notably in the West, which, when they come to power, often retreat into nationalism and promote an isolationist agenda. Two notions antithetical to globalization. The global economy is so intricately intertwined that it is impossible to bring globalization to an end. However, it is possible to slow it down and even to put it into reverse. We anticipate that the pandemic will do just that. It has already re-erected borders with a vengeance, reinforcing to an extreme trends that were already in full glare before it erupted with full force in March 2020, when it became a truly global pandemic sparing no country, such as tougher border controls, mainly because of fears about immigration, and greater protectionism, mainly because of fears about globalization. Tighter border controls for the purpose of managing the progression of the pandemic make eminent sense, but the risk that the revival of the nation-state leads progressively to much greater nationalism is real, a reality that the globalization trilemma framework offered by Danny Roderick captured. In the early 2010s, when globalization was becoming a sensitive political and social issue, the Harvard economist explained why it would be the inevitable causality if nationalism rises. The trilemma suggests that the three notions of economic globalization, political democracy, and the nation-state are mutually irreconcilable, based on the logic that only two can effectively coexist at any given time. Democracy and national sovereignty are only compatible if globalization is contained. By contrast, if both the nation state and globalization flourish, then democracy becomes untenable. And then, if both democracy and globalization expand, there is no place for the nation state. Therefore, one can only ever choose two out of the three. This is the essence of the trilemma. The European Union has often been used as an example to illustrate the pertinence of the conceptual framework offered by the trilemma. Combining economic integration, a proxy for globalization, with democracy implies that the important decisions have to be made at a supranational level, which somehow weakens the sovereignty of the nation state. In the current environment, what the political trilemma framework suggests is that globalization must necessarily be contained if we are not to give up some national sovereignty or some democracy. Therefore, the rise of nationalism makes the retreat of globalization inevitable in most of the world, an impulse particularly notable in the West. The vote for Brexit and the election of President Trump on a protectionist platform are two momentous markers of the Western backlash against globalization. Subsequent studies not only validate Roderick's trilemma, but also show that the rejection of globalization by voters is a rational response when the economy is strong and inequality is high. The most visible form of progressive deglobalization will occur at the heart of its nuclear reactor, the global supply chain that has become emblematic of globalization. How and why will this play out? The shortening or relocalization of supply chains will be encouraged by 1. Businesses that see it as a risk mitigation measure against supply chain disruption, the resilience versus efficiency trade-off, and 2. Political pressure from both the right and the left. Since 2008, the drive towards greater localization has been firmly on the political agenda in many countries, particularly in the West. But it will now be accelerated in the post-pandemic era. On the right, the pushback against globalization is driven by protectionists and national security hawks who were already gathering force before the pandemic started. Now they will create alliances and sometimes merge with other political forces that will see the benefit of embracing an anti-globalization agenda. On the left, activists and Green parties that were already stigmatizing air travel and asking for a rollback against globalization will be emboldened by the positive effect the pandemic had on our environment. Far fewer carbon emissions, much less air and water pollution. Even without pressure from the far right and the Green activists, many governments will realize that some situations of trade dependency are no longer politically acceptable. How can the US administration, for example, accept that 97% of antibiotics supplied in the country come from China? This process of reversing globalization will not happen overnight. Shortening supply chains will be both very challenging and very costly. For example, a thorough and all-encompassing decoupling from China would require from companies making such a move and investment of hundreds of billions of dollars in newly located factories, and from governments equivalent amounts to fund new infrastructure like airports, transportation links, and housing to serve the relocated supply chains. Notwithstanding that the political desire for decoupling may in some cases be stronger than the actual ability to do so, the direction of the trend is nonetheless clear. The Japanese government made this obvious when it set aside 243 billion of its 108 trillion Japanese yen rescue package to help Japanese companies pull their operations out of China. On multiple occasions, the US administration has hinted at similar measures. The most likely outcome along the globalization no globalization continuum lies in an in between solution: regionalization. The success of the European Union as a free trade area or the new regional comprehensive economic partnership in Asia, a proposed free trade agreement among the 10 countries that compose ASEAN, are important illustrative cases of how regionalization may well become a new watered down version of globalization. Even the free states that compose North America now trade more with each other than with China or Europe. As Paragkana points out, regionalism was clearly overtaking globalism before the pandemic exposed the vulnerabilities of our long-distance interdependence. For years, with the partial exception of direct trade between the US and China, globalization, as measured by the exchange of goods, was already becoming more intra-regional than inter-regional. In the early 1990s, North America absorbed 35% of East Asia's exports, while today this proportion is down to 20%, mainly because East Asia's share of exports to itself grows every year. A natural situation as Asian countries move up the value chain, consuming more of what they produce. In 2019, as the US and China unleashed a trade war, US trade with Canada and Mexico rose, while falling with China. At the same time, China's trade with ASEAN rose for the first time to above $300 billion. In short, deglobalization in the form of greater regionalization was already happening. COVID-19 will just accelerate this global divergence as North America, Europe, and Asia focus increasingly on regional self-sufficiency rather than on the distant and intricate global supply chains that formerly epitomized the essence of globalization. What form might this take? It could resemble the sequence of events that brought an earlier period of globalization to an end, but with a regional twist. Anti-globalization was strong in the run-up to 1914 and up to 1918, then less so during the 1920s, but it reignited in the 1930s as a result of the Great Depression, triggering an increase in tariff and non-tariff barriers that destroyed many businesses and inflicted much pain on the largest economies of that time. The same could happen again, with a strong impulse to reshore that spreads beyond healthcare and agriculture to include large categories of non-strategic products. Both the far right and the far left will take advantage of the crisis to promote a protectionist agenda with higher barriers to the free flow of capital goods and people. I love how he's saying we're the same. I mean, I guess in some sense I'm a protectionist. I do think we should. Uh, I'm a protectionist in the sense that I think that, yeah, I do think that, like, production should be as regionalized or localized as possible. I do think that should be the case. I mean, a protectionist agenda implies. Does he know what he's talking about when he says far left? Like, 'cause I mean, I suppose there would be, like left wing parties that have like some form of like protectionist thing going on to protect domestic workers. But that's not far left. Like that confused me a little bit. Fine, I will just move on. Several surveys conducted in the first few months of 2020 revealed that international companies fear a return and aggravation of protectionism in the US, not only on trade, but also in cross-border mergers and acquisitions and government procurement. What happens in the US will inevitably ricochet elsewhere, with other advanced economies imposing more barriers to trade and investment. Defying the appeals from experts and international organizations to refrain from protectionism. See, the thing about protectionist economic policy which we're seeing now with Trump and the tariffs. It harms domestic small businesses. It makes the prices of shit go up. So other countries don't want to buy the goods your country produces. And shit becomes more expensive to import as well and shit like that. Like companies have to pay more to get shit, which means shit costs more. That cost gets passed on to the consumer. This is basic economics. Like, this can't really be denied. So, protectionism in this sense of like tariffs and all this kind of shit to try and like the approach of trying to bring domestic industries back by forcing other countries to fuck off, like with tariffs and shit like that. That hurts working class people more than it helps by a very significant degree. What I tend to propose as an alternative is grassroots. Is again grassroots. Grassroots attempts at organic reshoring from the bottom up through depending on so this sort of ties into the talk about prefiguration before. It ties into ties into that. There are some things, some industries, agriculture. Do not monetize that shit. Do not monetize that shit. If there's going to be grassroots, like a movement, a building towards agricultural self-sufficiency, I don't recommend worker cooperatives for that. Okay, I'll explain this in more detail when I've finished reading this bit. We got like 2.5 more pages of this, and then I'll explain how I would lay things out. So, yeah. This somber scenario is not inevitable, but over the next few years, we should expect the tensions between the forces of nationalism and openness to play out across 3 critical dimensions. 1, global institutions. 2, trade. And 3, capital flows. Recently, global institutions and international organizations have been either enfeebled, like the World Trade Organization or the World Health Organization, or not up to the task, the latter due more to being underfinanced and overgoverned than to inherent inadequacy. Global trade, as we saw in the previous chapter, will almost certainly contract as companies shorten their supply chain and ensure that they no longer rely on a single country or business abroad for critical parts and components. In the case of particularly sensitive industries like pharmaceuticals or healthcare materials, and sectors considered to be of national security interest, like telecommunications or energy generation, there may even be an ongoing process of de-integration. This is already becoming a requirement in the US, and it would be surprising if this attitude does not spread to other countries and other sectors. Geopolitics is also inflicting some economic pain through the so-called weaponization of trade, triggering fear among global companies that they can no longer assume an orderly and predictable resolution of trade conflicts through the international rule of law. As for international capital flows, it seems already evident that national authorities and public defiance will constrain them. As already shown by so many countries and regions as different as Australia, India, or the EU, protectionist considerations will become ever more present in the post-pandemic era. Measures will range from national governments buying stakes in strategic companies to prevent foreign takeovers or imposing diverse restrictions on such takeovers, to foreign direct investment, FDI, being subjected to government approval. It is telling that, in April 2020, the US administration decided to block a publicly administered pension fund from investing in China. In the coming years, it seems inevitable that some deglobalization will happen, spurred by the rise of nationalism and greater international fragmentation. There is no point in trying to restore the status quo ex ante, or something. Hyperglobalization has lost all its political and social capital, and defending it is no longer politically tenable. But it is important to limit the downside of a possible freefall that would precipitate major economic damage and social suffering. Hasty retreat from globalization would entail trade and currency wars, damaging every country's economy, provoking social havoc, and triggering ethno or clan nationalism. The establishment of a much more inclusive and equitable form of globalization that makes it sustainable, both socially and environmentally, is the only viable way to manage retreat or revolution. He doesn't bring up so much for Klaus Schwab being a Marxist. This requires policy solutions addressed in the concluding chapter and some form of effective global governance. Progress is indeed possible in those global areas that have traditionally benefited from international cooperation, like environmental agreements, public health, and tax havens. This will only come about through improved global governance, the most natural and effective mitigating factor against protectionist tendencies. However, we do not yet know how its framework will evolve in the foreseeable future. At the moment, the signs are ominous that it is not going in the right direction. There is no time to waste. If we do not improve the functioning and legitimacy of our global institutions, the world will soon become unmanageable and very dangerous. There cannot be a lasting recovery without a global strategic framework of governance. I'm starting to see what Besley Marx is talking about. So what we have here to a great degree, Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, is a representative of international finance capital. International finance capital suffers from protectionism. Like, that is the case. Whereas, like, economic nationalism, protectionism, things like that, tend to be a more prevalent position of national industrial capitalists. So, rather than your big venture rather than your big investment firms, in the case of national industrial, you're talking about the manufacturing sector, not the financial sector, basically. A lot of the capitalists in the manufacturing sector do have some benefit to protectionist policies. That is not universal, but it is no mistake that the biggest proponents of, so-called neo-nationalism, as I've seen it called online before, the resurgence of like nationalist and protectionist tendencies, has been primarily driven by right-wing manufacturing companies with right-wing leaders. I think the Silicon Valley tech bros. Think mining and refinery companies, things like that. And a lot of that. So you would probably think at face value. Now, this is the way I am currently suspecting that this basically is playing out behind the scenes and amongst the ruling class. You would think that national industrial capitalists would not be overly on board with like protectionist measures, because a lot of them ship off their factories to other countries where they can get cheaper labor. Now, the main thing that is driving a lot of these national industrial capitalists towards these nationalistic, protectionist, right-wing tendencies is climate change. Is the fact that their profits are threatened to a significant degree by climate legislation. Now, there are exceptions to this, so it's kind of multifaceted. In terms of like your mining industries, mining, refineries, meat production, car manufacturing, fossil fuels, plastics, all of that sort of stuff. That is being threatened by climate legislation. That is the primary driver of the right-wing shift. In that sector. Now, the issue with like the Silicon Valley tech bros, because you'll notice like they don't really lean protectionist. They tend to lean more. They tend to lean more libertarian, right libertarian, with like nationalist rhetorical characteristics. But another big thing with regards to the Silicon Valley tech bros is over time, they have basically formed an eschatological techno fetishist cult. That is like the main driver. Okay, the main driver is that they think technology can solve everything. It can't. It can't. Says the techno fetishist cultist. No, so technology cannot solve everything. It can solve many things if done with care it can't solve everything. Another thing these tech billionaires are pushing for is like, more surveillance, more automation, which I I don't think innovation is good under capitalism for the working class because it leads to job losses. Under a communist system, um, under a communist system, automation would free up more time for leisure. Now, thinking realistically, without the relatively utopian horizon of like fully automated luxury communism, thinking realistically, the likely scenario is that all that will be automated is the shit that nobody wants to fucking do. The stuff that people want to do will likely not be automated. Like creative industries. In a communist society, a lot more people would go into creative industries because they would have more so it would have more incentive because it's not a explain it. It's not like you're not like there's a lot of like socioeconomic factors that come to like people not being able to go into creative industries a lot of the time. One, it is a bit like in a capitalist system where it has to make money in order for you to really have success, to do it properly, you're kind of pinning your future on luck. Which I acknowledge that as someone writing books. Unless you have a lot of money, unless you already have a lot of money, you're riding on luck. Um, that's not the realistic scenario. I'm talking a realistic scenario within a communist system. That doesn't. The realistic scenario is that people give up voluntarily and without contest all creative positions to the machines. That's not. No! Why? Why? You see a backlash now to that shit. You already see a backlash now to AI written novels and AI generated videos and like that's not like and a lot of that again, shit like deep fakes and AI voices and shit like that. A lot of that is precisely it's not just by those who are afraid of losing their jobs. It's not just by those. They're the ones leading it because yes, but you are guaranteeing their survival under communism, so why should they care? Because people like to do that shit. People like to do that shit. Like, I'm not about to offload my writing onto a fucking AI chatbot. and that's not because, that's because I want to write. There are actors who want to act. There are writers who want to write, musicians who want to make music. They are not going to. It's not the same, though. It's not the same. It's not the same. And people en masse know that it is not the same. Listening to an AI generated song is not the same as listening to an actual song. Reading an AI written book is not the same as reading an actual book that somebody wrote. It's it's a level of sentimental value that a human wrote a book, like a fiction book. Whereas if an AI writes it, there's no fucking anything. Well, there's no sentimental value. There's to an author or anybody else. Like that's no. So, your argument of sentimentality only works because we have grown up without AI. In 15 years, we'll have 20 years who grew up with AI and they quiet. I get the point you're trying to make. Yeah, I get the point you're trying to make. I think that is why we do need to push back against against AI automation of creative industries. That that was the thing. That was what motivated the writer strike and the actor strike. That was what motivated those strikes. It was more of this sort of automation of the process by big Hollywood firms that were basically just AI writing, AI scripting, and deep faking, and all sorts of stuff. Like, I think that I personally think that the only ethical way to do deepfakes is if you are using it to de-age or age a particular actor. Although you probably wouldn't want to age an actor, but like de-age an actor, because usually if you're creating a new movie, then you'll want to try and get someone who is in the age demographic of the character. However, when you have like legacy franchises, things like Star Wars, for instance, what they did in The Mandalorian actually was that was it Mark Hamill still who was doing that last scene at the end of The Mandalorian season 2? Like, was that still Mark Hamill and they just deep faked him to de-age him? Because that's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of thing that I would consider ethical with the consent of the actor, of course. Deep faking dead people is not like deep faking dead people is not good. That is not ethical. That shit is not ethical. Um, that's a big thing. Deep faking dead people, no. I think once someone dies, I suppose an exception can be made their if they give their consent before they die, that people are welcome to use their likeness. In that scenario, sure. But there will be no such sentimentality for human creative works, and they'll be seen as lesser, low quality, and subpar in comparison to the perfect generations of AI. AI shit, it's got no humanity in it, though. It is worse. It is worse. It is not as good. Like, it's not as good. It's not as good. You're gonna say it's getting better, but like, I don't know. I mean, do you not give credence to the idea that, you know, not so much sentimentality, but like uncanny valley. Like, what about uncanny valley? Not so much like sentimentality, because sure, that's an argument by tradition. Sorry, it's a Discord. Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Yes, I have. I have seen modern AI video generation. And yes, I have seen it compared to the old Will Smith eating spaghetti thing. Like, yes, it has gotten better. What about what about like the whole thing with what about like Uncanny Valley? The amount of Uncanny Valley will soon completely be gone. Do you think people are being what desensitized to Uncanny Valley by the emergence of more I imagine robotics? The more realistic it becomes, the less Uncanny Valley there'll be because it'll look more and more human. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that argument wouldn't that just strengthen the Uncanny Valley though? Yeah, I mean, there are some people like myself who don't particularly care. I mean, I don't particularly care about it. I don't particularly feel the Uncanny Valley effect. I I don't really experience that effect when with respect to like robots and whatnot. I don't. Um. So yes, I would say it is possible to desensitize people to the uncanny valley. Yes, I would be evidence of that. I do not give a fuck. The closer you approach, the more uncanny until you reach the plateau where there is no more uncanny. It's not desensitizing. I mean, it kind of is though. What like it really is just desensitizing. Like, I mean, the uncanny valley emerged. I watched a video about this one time. The uncanny valley effect basically emerged as like a survival mechanism against like other tribes that were not your own. Um, and even like shit like ethnic and racial divides can be brought down in some way to like the uncanny valley effect. But even in that instance, people who are, not racist at all, who are like colorblind, color, not colorblind medical condition, but colorblind like anti-racist, they do not give a fuck. That is like desensitizing the uncanny valley. And now, I mean, the AI thing, like realistic AI androids, that is the kind of thing that is it's more uncanny. Like I mean, I can see. Okay, like would you say that maybe not desensitizing but normalizing the uncanny, not so much desensitizing people to the uncanny, but normalizing it? Would that be a better way of describing it? Which I mean, like, especially in the case of like hypothetical sentient robots,
would tie into like the concept of like the broadening of one's moral circle. I mean, not just but normalizing would be proliferation between putting them into industries. What I'm referring to here is your sentimental argument. This is just like a Discord DM thing. I'll talk to you about it after, because I wanted to get into the last thing I wanted to bring up, which was the whole thing about like what industries as like a prefigurative method. Like, so as I was saying before, uh, um, agriculture. So with regards to building like a bottom-up alternative economy kind of thing, the kind of what I propose is a kind of protectionist approach to organically bring back like domestic stuff. Um, agriculture, do not set up worker cooperatives for that. Like essential things like agriculture, like education, like healthcare, essential things should not be turned into like for-profit worker cooperatives. Like I would not put that stuff under like the venture communism model. I wouldn't put that stuff there. I would put that stuff firmly in the camp of mutual aid. Mutual aid or various like other forms of cooperatives, like housing cooperatives or energy cooperatives, which are not for-profit things. They're basically just a democratized. It's democratizing the production in a like I would. So essentials should be grassroots rebuilt in a non-profit way, whether that be mutual aid, housing cooperatives, energy cooperatives, um, grassroots education, healthcare, things like that. Um, farms are expensive and lose money. I mean, that's why I mean, like it's like you've got to it's a work in progress kind of thing. You have to build up to the point where you have full self-sufficiency. And look, you cannot completely decouple, like you cannot completely decouple from the system. You can't completely decouple from it. You can decouple it, like you can decouple it enough that it can do significant damage, but you can't fully decouple it from the system without destroying the system itself. Like you can't decouple entirely without destroying the system itself. Yeah, but okay. What about like not so much like farms, but like homesteads? Homesteads. Like a big thing is like homesteading, like mutual aid homesteading. That is like a big thing. Hmm. Well, that's where I was saying before. Like if you if you decouple so much, it really becomes like a threat to the functioning of the system. They're going to use violence. What do you mean you need subsidies? What like homesteads, like small house, like small home gardens is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about home gardens, not like like not farms. And look, like with regards to like getting workers, for instance, part of the mutual aid structure is volunteer work. That's part like that is what mutual aid is. It is collaborative, collective volunteering. That's like machinery, machinery at a certain scale. Feeding a single family of four today requires an acre. That depends. Vegan or you got animals too, because you can use less. But there's also other like space saving things like vertical farming. You can do that kind of stuff as well. Now that only works to a degree. Um, I mean, there are plenty of novel ways that you can do home agriculture um that can require um less in the way of is optimal for average soil or healthy diet. I mean, yeah, climate. Your climate comes into consideration, which is why. Yeah, that would take a lot of vertical farming. That would probably take growing shit on your home. Like, I mean, you can do that. You can, like, there are certain plants and shit that you can set up, grid things on your walls that can grow the vines through them. Like, there's vertical farming. There's a bunch of stuff that you can do to lower it. Um, and that's where, like, the thing is with like homesteading mutual aid, it's like a collaborative volunteering thing. And what you do is like you would have like people would help each other. That's the idea. Like you would have, let's say that you have a street, like a single street, which would be the first step I'll be trying to work towards. A single street. They all have their own home gardens. Some of them grow different stuff. Maybe some of them have chickens or something for eggs. Um, Metric, please. Literally everybody else uses metric. Everybody else uses metric. It's only America that's using the fucking imperial system still. It's fucking outdated and it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, okay. 92 square meters. Hold on. So are you talking about like when you say homes like 92 square meters, like is that like an average suburban home? Like with a relatively small backyard? Because I mean the backyard here is pretty big. I think I could make do with this to feed the whole fam to feed the size of the land we've got. I don't remember exactly how much it is. Uh, but I think it would be enough to at least contribute most of the calories needed to feed the 5 people living there. So not all. Like is that like an average suburban home? Because there's a difference between an average suburban home and like a rural home. Rural homes tend to be a bit bigger at times. They tend to be a bit bigger in terms of like yards. So I don't know about that. Is that well like yeah, I don't know if um I mean like that's extremely good conditions. I mean there are ways to increase soil fertility. Like there are ways to increase soil fertility. And I don't even mean using artificial fertilizers. Um like there are like organic ways to do it. Um well, I'm still looking into it. I will have to see what's going on. But like here's the thing. Like, okay, big question I need to ask here. Are you talking about a fully vegan diet or are you talking about animals as well? Like, are you talking about a vegan diet or an omnivorous diet? Because animals do increase the amount that you have to grow to feed the animals, not to mention space for the animals. So, like, you need space for, like, if you have animals, you need more space for animals, and then you need more crops to feed the animals. So, so you're giving yourself extra mouths to feed. But if you go for like a fully vegan diet, you could probably reduce it more, right? What do you mean minimal water? Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm still figuring a lot of this out. It will take time. Like, and especially if you're going the permaculture route, the permaculture route requires active pre-planning. And like, yeah, doing a permaculture requires like it tends to like your soil conditions will increase if you're using like if you're doing permaculture because it sort of tries to make a more self-sustaining mini ecosystem. Um, but the thing is, permaculture is not easy to do, and it requires more active planning, and that's the big problem with that one. When I'm talking about capturing the farms. Like, I'm not. I mean, there are other ways I could do this. I mean, I will. Look, I will be. I do want to write a book that goes through. Eventually, want to write a book that goes through a very robust prefiguration plan. Or at least, one prefiguration plan that I think can do the trick to in Australia at least. I don't know about elsewhere, but or like in because we have decent enough wages. Like wages have not kept up with inflation, but we're not getting paid $7 a fucking hour. We're not getting paid $7 an hour. Like our minimum wage is like fucking 20 something an hour. So we do have more labor protections here. Um, but yeah, like in terms of like, I'll have to finish this in a moment. I'll one more cigarette and then I'll end it. But I do want to write a book, um, laying out what I think is a robust, um, a robust localist prefiguration strategy. Um, Now it would be very and like that's using multiple factors. So like I've just been talking about this one particular thing. But yes, there is a place for worker cooperatives. And in terms of worker cooperatives, I think the optimal model is the venture communist model, the venture communism model. Um, that is going to be a good model for building worker cooperatives. Yeah, yeah. Um, I don't know. I don't know how our cost of living compares though. Like, because that's another thing as well. Like, that's the monetary wage, but like, then you got to factor in like what's the real wage, which is like you have to factor in like the cost of living for that kind of stuff. Um, so, but yeah, so I think in terms of like non-essential stuff, worker cooperatives, and for worker cooperatives, I would opt for the venture communism model. Um, but that is like this is all stuff I will I do want to write on this. I want to write on this and sort of figure out to try and formulate a localist prefiguration strategy. Um, that I think can be broadly applicable, at least in first world countries. And yes, you would need like I mean the prefiguration strategy. I would be taking it from a slightly idealistic perspective in terms of state resistance. Like that. So, because going into the question of state resistance is another question. But you've got to build shit up to a very significant degree before you get to that point. Like if you're getting to the point where you're literally weakening the economy with prefiguration practices, I mean, you've built things up to the point where a revolution is feasible. So, that's the main thing. If you have built things up to such a degree that the state is riding up your ass because you are like tanking the shit out of the economy by putting together these alternative frameworks, that you've gotten to the point where a revolution becomes feasible. So it's not really. So then the question is, where the fuck do we get guns from? Like that. Like the question is not. Like the question becomes more of a question of revolution if you've gotten to the point where you are actively damaging the economy with prefiguration practices. It is no longer a question of how do we prefigure more. The question then becomes, where are the guns? Like, so it's like, yeah, that's a pretty big thing there. But like what? Yeah, once your prefiguration state has gotten to the point where it is literally rubbing up against the established order to the point where the government is where the state is riding up your ass, like that's the point where it's time to move on to the revolutionary things. But yeah, I'll finish the smoke and then I'll finish the stream. Is that in the US? I don't know how much it is here. Oh, the rent would fucking add like another fucking 2,000 onto that at the moment, wouldn't it? The the rent in the US and in most Western countries at this point, that would probably double it in a lot of cases. Wouldn't that be the US as well? Aren't your rents pretty fucking high? Haven't your rents shot up too? Yeah. Fuck, Australia's average rent. Hang on. Uh, Australia average rent. The national median weekly rent in Australia is $650 for houses and $630 for units. I should point out that median is a fucking terrible way of doing it. I despise the way they do median. Yeah, you're pretty much doubling it. 212 work hours a month. So that's basically like, so yeah, two income household. Is that like two income household numbers? Oh, we can talk about this afterwards, but yeah, I've done the smokes. But yeah, so I'm gonna finish the stream off for tonight. Um, so I will be doing the gaming stream on Thursday. Um, I will most likely just go back to playing Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. It's probably what I will just probably just go back to that. So yeah. But yeah, so I'll see people next time. Yeah. Good night to people in Australia and who it is nighttime. Good morning to people in like America and elsewhere. I'll be back on Thursday for the gaming stream.